makes a deal with Democrats, will Republican hardliners try to oust him?
Bring it.
The Republican leading that charge, Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, is here, and then Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will join me. Plus, upping the ante. Former President Trump ramps up his violent rhetoric.
If you rob a store, you can fully expect to be shot as you are leaving that store.
But as more former aides warn he's unfit for office, does he have the GOP nomination all sewn up? Our political panel will discuss. And Trailblazer, an outpouring of affection for the late Senator Dianne Feinstein.
She left on her own terms.
What you might not have known about her when her friend House Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi joins me ahead. Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is open for at least 45 more days. Today, our servicemen and women do not have to worry about missing any paychecks. TSA agents, too. National parks remain open after House Speaker Kevin McCarthy caught almost everyone off guard Saturday with a plan to work with House Democrats to keep the U.S. government open without demanding any of the spending cuts hardline House Republicans had been demanding just one day earlier, as Republicans are trying to collect themselves after stepping on rake after rake this week. And Democrats are taking a victory lap after what was, by any objective measure, an embarrassing week for the House GOP. The end result buys McCarthy a little more time to settle a raging disagreement within his conference over spending and, more to the point, over his leadership. But his gambit could also put his job on the line as a handful of hardliners consider whether to follow through on their threat to oust McCarthy from the speakership for working with Democrats to pass a clean spending bill. And joining me now is the man leading that charge against Speaker McCarthy, Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. So you have been threatening to topple McCarthy, issue a motion to vacate the speakership if he worked with Democrats to fund the government with a clean CR, a clean government spending bill, which is exactly what he did on Friday and Saturday. The House gavels back in tomorrow at noon. Are you going to make a motion to vacate?
Speaker McCarthy made an agreement with House conservatives in January, and since then he has been in brazen, repeated material breach of that agreement. This agreement that he made with Democrats to really blow past a lot of the spending guardrails we'd set up is a last straw. And then overnight I learned that Kevin McCarthy had a secret deal with Democrats on Ukraine. So as he was baiting Republicans to vote for a continuing resolution without Ukraine money, saying that we were going to jam the Senate on Ukraine, he then turns around and makes a secret deal. Now, I know you and I probably have different views on U.S. involvement in Ukraine, but however you think about that question, it should be subject to open review, analysis, and not some backroom deal.
So I do motion to vacate tomorrow?
I do intend to file a motion to vacate against Speaker McCarthy this week. I think we need to rip off the Band-Aid. I think we need to move on with new leadership that can be trustworthy. Look, the one thing everybody has in common is that nobody trusts Kevin McCarthy. He lied to Biden. He lied to House conservatives. He had appropriators marking to a different number altogether. And the reason we were backed up against this shutdown politics is not a bug of the system, it's a feature. Kevin McCarthy's goal was to make multiple contradictory promises, to delay everything, back us up against shutdown politics, and at the end of the day, blow past the spending guardrails he'd agreed to.
So how many Republicans do you think will be with you in your motion to vacate? Because obviously, for people at home who don't know, you need 218 votes to get him out of the speakership. You don't have 218 Republican votes. You're going to need Democrats. Let's start with the Republicans. How many Republicans do you have?
Well, enough so that when you host this show next week, if Kevin McCarthy is still the Speaker of the House, he will be serving at the pleasure of the Democrats. He will be working for the Democrats. The only way Kevin McCarthy is Speaker of the House at the end of this coming week is if Democrats bail him out. Now, they probably will. I actually think that when you believe in nothing, as Kevin McCarthy does, everything's negotiable.
Okay, but
and I think he'll cut a deal with the Democrats.
Let's be honest here, though, because if you succeed in vacating him, you also will have to make a deal with the Democrats. You also will have to get Democratic votes to kick him out.
Absolutely. I will make no deal with Democrats and concede no terms to them. I actually think Democrats should vote against Speaker McCarthy for free. I don't think I should have to deal them
Oh, so
anything.
you're not going to cut any deals with them?
Absolutely not. And I don't think that any Republicans that share my view on Speaker McCarthy would cut deals with Democrats. But here's the thing. I'm done owning Kevin McCarthy. Right? We made a deal at the end of in January to allow him to assume the speakership, and I'm not owning him anymore because he doesn't tell the truth. And so if Democrats want to own Kevin McCarthy by bailing him out, I can't stop him, but then he'll be their speaker, not mine.
So let's talk about what's just happened this last week, the government shutdown, because obviously, as you know, you've made a lot of enemies this last week. A lot of people, I'm talking about House Republicans. I'm not talking about Democrats or the media. I'm talking about House Republicans. They're pretty angry. Take a listen.
Unfortunately, a handful of people, and in particular a party of one, Matt Gaetz, have chosen to put his own agenda, his own personal agenda, above all else. He's not a conservative Republican, he's a charlatan.
They killed the most conservative position we could take, and then called themselves the real conservatives, which is like, make that make sense.
Now, the conservative Wall Street Journal editorial board wrote an editorial about what you're doing called A Government Shutdown for Dummies. And among the criticisms, they said, quote, the real goal of the malcontents seems to be to topple Mr. McCarthy for personal spite. It's also pointlessly stupid with failure foreordained. Their constituents wanted conservative policies, but the Gaetz Republicans are playing personal games. What do you say to these conservatives, these Republicans?
Well, I think what's really stupid is sitting atop a $33 trillion debt, facing $2.2 trillion annual deficits, while the world is de-dollarizing. Just in August, you saw the BRICS system that is moving away from the dollar add 6 new countries, including Gulf monarchies, including even some of the G20 economies in our own hemisphere.
People at home, that's BRIC is Brazil, Russia, India, China. Go ahead.
Yeah, and they are moving away from the dollar. You're seeing the African Union move away from the dollar. U.S. News just last month said that de-dollarization was the economic trend of our day. And so some people try to make policy disagreements personal because their own policy failures are so personally embarrassing. But this isn't personal, Jake.
Yeah.
This is about spending. This is about the deal Kevin McCarthy made. If Kevin McCarthy didn't want to keep the deal to return to pre-COVID spending, if he didn't want to keep the deal to have single subject spending bills, not vote for government spending all up or down at once, then he shouldn't have made that deal. So this is about keeping Kevin McCarthy to his word. It's not about any personal animus or dispute.
But let's talk about this, because Speaker McCarthy argues that he had a bill on Friday that would have put forward less spending than what actually has now become the law for the next 45 days. That would have gone to the Senate. The Senate would have voted for their own bill, and then in a conference committee, there would have been a negotiation, and what would have become the law of the land for the next 45 days would have been less spending than what actually is now the bill. Take a listen to Speaker McCarthy.
And look, I welcome those 21 back in, and we would get a better and more conservative bill if they would simply vote with us.
Their argument is your point about debt and deficit spending, which is not an inaccurate point, was actually harmed by the stunt, by the temper tantrum of the government shutdown.
Well, that argument presupposes that the Senate was going to take up or conference that bill that McCarthy wanted. You already had Schumer speaking on the floor saying that they weren't even going to take that
but
up.
there would have been a conference committee, and there would have had to have been a negotiation.
First of all, that's never so what you're saying is that something would have occurred that has never occurred to negotiate a continuing resolution. I have never seen a conference committee in my 7 years in Congress, and I don't think one has occurred since the mid-90s where a continuing resolution has ever been conferenced. So you're asking your viewers to believe something that has never once happened. What has happened when the House has passed a continuing resolution is the Senate merely negotiates the feature of that continuing resolution by sending back what they want to send back, which is what they did. So we were always ending up here. Here's why I want to break the fever. Since the mid-90s, this country has been governed by either continuing resolution or omnibus spending.
And you have voted for continuing resolution in the past.
Well, I'm 5 years sober voting for continuing resolutions, and I should note that during those years, President Trump was growing the economy. But January marked a difference.
Deficit.
Yeah, and you know what?
Growing the deficits as well.
I regret
growing the deficits as well.
But we were growing the economy, and look.
You're talking about the national debt. You were growing. What did he add? $7 trillion, $8 trillion to the national debt. Donald
and
Trump?
by the way, I voted against 10 continuing resolutions under Donald Trump. I did not stand with Donald Trump on all of his spending priorities. I voted against way more than I voted for.
My point is, I don't know what this shutdown did to help the cause.
What shutdown?
The shutdown that almost happened.
Okay, so there wasn't a shutdown. So
the
shutdown
threat,
didn't do
the threat
anything.
of shutdown that you created.
We have to break the fever. We have to move to single
So
subject spending bills.
You broke a fever?
No, we didn't, unfortunately. That's why we have to now move to vacate, because we have to get a system where the House and Senate will negotiate over each of these agencies of government independently. And I understand that in divided government, that means that you have to take into account the views of Senate Democrats, the views of the White House. But what I want to
do?
Of
you
course,
understand that?
Of course.
Because you're on the floor of the House talking about what Kevin McCarthy needs to do is to allow line item vetoes by people like
that's
you.
not true.
Line item votes against the salaries of people who are investigating Donald Trump, the salaries of individuals who are offering sweetheart deals to Hunter Biden. That, to me, is not the language of somebody who understands the balance of power in House and the Senate and how all legislation actually functions.
Well, I think I do.
That, to me, is the language
Jake,
of somebody
let me
who
explain
is
to you.
looking for clicks and likes and Fox hits, not somebody who actually is trying to reduce the debt.
Well, you might want to check Fox. I haven't been hitting there as much recently. What I can tell you is that the way the legislative process works, as a 12-year lawmaker in the state and federal level, the House passes legislation, the Senate passes legislation, and then you work to iron out those differences. I believe the best way to advance the interests of the American people is for the House to take the most conservative position and then engage that negotiation. Where that negotiation has failed all Americans of all stripes is when it centers around what ornament you're going to hang on a continuing resolution or an omnibus bill. The responsible, sober, adult way to handle this is with individual spending bills open to amendment. And by the way, if people don't want to vote for the amendments that reduce salaries or cut spending or engage in programmatic analysis, they can vote no. And then the voters can hold people accountable. But the reason we sit atop a $33 trillion debt is because a system has been designed in Washington, D.C., where no one is responsible for the spending.
But where are you
I want
when
to force the votes. And here's what you're missing. McCarthy agreed to this. So you may not like this deal. You may think that it's too many votes and too much governing. But McCarthy agreed to it in January, and his breach of that
I don't have an
agreement
opinion on
is
it
a
one way or
problem.
the other. And I actually agree with your position on the fact that we
Welcome aboard.
I've been here long before you were born, my friend. But like we spend way too much money and we don't take in 100%.
Yeah,
I agree.
we spent
but where
$7
are
trillion
you?
and taken $5.
But where are you when it comes to Senate Democrats who actually control the Senate and the president? And you could force the president's hand if you actually worked with Senate Democrats and got some sort of bill in front of him. That's how you force it.
Well, in the time I've been here, we have not been able to cleave Senate Democrats away from President Biden.
How many Senate Democrats
so
do
that's
you
not
know?
true.
How many do you talk to?
Well, I've talked to several of them. I go over to the Senate as much as many House members. Have talked to Senator Manchin, talked to Senator Sinema. She and I served together in the House. We've had a number of folks go from the House to the Senate.
One last question, because the reason I know.
But by the way, it's really important you get this point. I'm okay with bipartisan negotiation. I just want it to be on single subject spending bills, not on a global deal that funds the whole government or doesn't.
And the appropriations bills are going through the process
at a snail's pace until I held a political gun to McCarthy's head and forced the Congress to stay until midnight to take these votes.
You should
and
talk
move
to the
these bills.
Appropriations Committee. There are 4 members of the
Well,
Freedom
by the
Caucus
way,
on it.
the Appropriations Chairman left the meeting we were having to iron these things out to go to a lobbyist fundraiser.
Last question for you, because the reason you talk about this being about the issue and not animus is because there are a lot of people, a lot of House Republicans who think that there is this personal animus between you and Speaker McCarthy. And I just have to ask you, how much do you blame Speaker McCarthy for the fact that you are under investigation by the House Ethics Committee? How much is that part of what's going on here?
Not at all. Jake, I am the most investigated man in the United States Congress. I've been cleared by the DOJ, the FEC by a 5-0 vote, and the people who spread criminal lies about me are sitting in federal prison right now. So I'm fine being investigated by anyone and everyone.
I have seen personal communications between you and other people in which you blame McCarthy for your ethics investigation.
When Kevin McCarthy went out publicly and said, this isn't about me breaking my word, it's because Gates has ethics problems, certainly that was him gaslighting the Ethics Committee. But here's the thing, Jake, I'm not alone. People can say this is a party of one. I have tens of millions of Americans who stand with me on this, and I have a requisite number of House Republicans, a sufficient number to ensure that we don't own Kevin McCarthy anymore. By week's end, he will either not be Speaker or he will be Speaker serving at the pleasure of House Democrats.
To be continued. We'll see what happens. Congressman Matt Gaetz, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Will House Democrats help Kevin McCarthy keep his job? Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will be here ahead. But first, We're going to take a moment to remember one barrier-breaking lawmaker, Senator Dianne Feinstein, who passed away this week, when we talk to another barrier-breaking member of Congress.
Needs to become a little more familiar with firearms and their deadly characteristics.
I am quite familiar with firearms. I became mayor as a product of assassination.
I'm aware
I
of that.
found my assassinated colleague and put a finger through a bullet hole,
Yeah.
trying to get... I proposed gun control legislation in San Francisco. I went through a recall on the basis of it.
The late Senator Dianne Feinstein putting fellow Senator Larry Craig in his place. Yesterday, Feinstein made her final journey home to California on a military plane, accompanied by her dear friend and fellow California lawmaker. That friend joins us now, House Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi. Madam Speaker, thank you so much for joining us. I want to focus this interview on your fellow San Francisco Democrat, Senator Feinstein, but I do have to ask you, House Democrats are going to seek your advice regarding this news made moments ago on the show about this pending motion to vacate Kevin McCarthy's speakership. How will you vote? And what advice would you give your fellow Democrats on whether they can trust Kevin McCarthy if he makes Democrats an offer so he can stay in power?
My advice to my fellow Democrats is simple. Follow the leader. Hakeem Jeffries has done a great job. Yesterday, we had a victory in the continuing resolution. It was a victory for Democrats, a defeat for the MAGAs. And I would say this one thing, listening to your conversation, if that's a conversation, you're back and forth there. It's such a fraud when they start, the basis of this is about spending. These are people who gave a tax cut to the richest people in America to the cost of $2 trillion to our national debt when what's-his-name was president of the United States. $2 trillion to the national debt. And that was to give 83% of the benefits to the top 1%. They're on the prowl for Medicare, Medicaid. They in their bill, they would cut a huge amount, almost a third of the administration of Social Security to help meet the needs of beneficiaries who have questions and the rest. So they and huge cuts in nutrition for WIC, women, infant, and children. It's not about the budget. It's about a values debate. And you're wasting your time on that guy because he has no sway in the House of Representatives, except to get on TV and to raise money on the internet. But anyway, forgetting that, so I'm talking about a serious legislator.
Let's talk
here.
about that.
So my advice, follow the leader.
Let's talk about her, because yesterday you accompanied Senator Dianne Feinstein on her final journey home to San Francisco aboard the military plane. It must have been a difficult journey. What was going through your mind during the flight?
Well, I was with her daughter, and see, with Dianne, it's obviously official, it's political, and it's very personal. This is a woman who she left on her own terms. You saw how she answered Larry Craig, but she did that any number of times when colleagues or others tried to minimize her standing on an issue. She and I were not always on the same place on the spectrum of politics, but we all cared about our country. And she, again, reached across the aisle all the time, would negotiate with anyone for our great state of California, brought home the bacon, respected our natural resources, the forest, the deserts, the ocean, the lakes, and the beautiful diversity of our people. She was an icon. She almost is more than an icon, because that's become almost a cliche. She came into office under such to the mayorship, such awful circumstances, and she unified the city. She gave comfort, and then right then we go into HIV/AIDS. So whether it's LGBTQ, women's rights, whatever it is, she has been a thoughtful, constructive, effective, productive leader and of national status. But still, for me, I can hardly talk about her without, because she's my neighbor, my friend, my family loves her. Personally, politically, in every way. We used to always say, if Dianne and I ran against each other, my daughter Nancy would probably vote for Dianne. That was the love that existed. But love is a good word for her, because she loved people, she loved California, she loved America, and to bring her home in the grand way that we did. Thank you, President Biden. Draped in the flag, she was such a patriot. Be welcomed by men and women in uniform as she came off the plane. Her daughter Catherine and granddaughter Eileen and son-in-law were there to welcome her personally. But officially, the city welcomed her, and of course, everyone personally did as well.
We heard so many wonderful stories, personal stories. Senator Gillibrand has this very moving story about how Senator Feinstein was just a very personal mentor to her, taking her under her wing when she arrived in the Senate, and then creating this very giant memo about how to be a senator that she really took time to make. Is there any personal story that you think back on when you think of her and your relationship with her?
Oh, so many. But as I say, in our case, it's personal, neighbors, and as then political and official. But I do think one story, it's not about me, it's more about my daughter Christine, and that is, Christine was chair of the Women's Caucus of the California Democratic Party, which is my political home, and there are probably 1,500 women in the Women's Caucus. And Diane came when she was passing legislation, she was writing legislation to protect young amateurs. The young athletes, the gymnasts and all came to her. She listened to them. She respected them. She wrote legislation. And why I bring up the Women's Caucus is she went to the Women's Caucus to talk about writing this bill, listening to these young girls who had been sexually abused or harassed and the rest. And she told them that this was about the safety of these girls. It was about the freedom of these girls to be who they wanted to be. And it was about the choice of them to, again, be the mistresses of their fate in terms of their reproductive freedom. But the point was, it was a master class because she showed them freedom, safety, choice. It's all connected. It's all connected. It was a master class. Now, the Women's Caucus of the California Democratic Party is not the most moderate group. It's more my shall we say, place on the spectrum. And they still quote Diane. And Christine was very proud of that because she taught. She respected views. She taught. She always felt a responsibility to mentor. This is a national figure, a stateswoman. Yeah. Someone. And I could tell many personal stories, but they don't have as much application to other people. I will tell one more. When we were moving for the Democratic Convention in San Francisco, I was chair of the California Democratic Party. We were trying to get the convention in San Francisco. So we went to see her. Willie Brown, Walter Shorenstein, and I went to see Diane to say, what about this? And she said, well, will it cost money? And we said, well, we have to raise money. And she said, well, my first concern are the people at Laguna Honda Hospital in San Francisco. This is where many lower-income people, not all lower, but lower-income people who need medical care and all go in San Francisco. Hundreds of them go in San Francisco. So she was always about people and meeting their needs with her responsibility. I could go on and on about some of those that people might not think of her as my first responsibility is to the poorest of the poor and under my responsibility in my city. Again, another time we'll have some more stories about her. Everybody's talking about the great legislation, and she was a great legislator. The gun violence, she saved lives. She saved people's lives. It was passed. Imagine, she was in Congress 1 year. She came 93. In 94, she passed the assault weapon ban, and then it was reinstated, and then it went away. But while it was there, it saved lives. How many people can make that claim? Yeah.
Madam Speaker, thank you so much. And condolences to you and to Senator Dianne Feinstein's loved ones and friends. Thank you so much.
Let me just say that some of the senators said that maybe her departure and the sadness that went with us focus people more on let's get the job done to keep government open for the people.
Well, may her memory be a blessing. Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it.
May she rest in peace. Thank you.
Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Could Democrats help Kevin McCarthy again? Congresswoman, government to shut down, but by the end of the day, it was still open, and they had made no concessions to the Republican majority to keep it that way. Joining us now, New York Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So, first of all, you just heard Congressman Matt Gaetz say he's going to move to oust McCarthy as Speaker this week. If a motion to vacate the chair comes to the floor, how would you vote?
Well, my vote beginning this term for Speaker of the House was for Hakeem Jeffries, and I do not intend on voting for a Republican Speaker of the House, but I believe that it's up to the Republican conference to determine their own leadership and deal with their own problems. But it's not up to Democrats to save Republicans from themselves, especially.
So do you think that there will be any Democrats that might vote to save McCarthy?
I mean, I certainly don't think that we would expect to see that unless there's a real conversation between the Republican and Democratic caucuses and Republican and Democratic leadership about what that would mean. But I don't think we give up votes for free.
And but would you vote to vacate? Would you vote to get rid of McCarthy as Speaker?
Would I cast that vote? Absolutely. Absolutely. I think Kevin McCarthy is a very weak speaker. He clearly has lost control of his caucus. He has brought the United States and millions of Americans to the brink, waiting until the final hour to keep the government open, and even then only issuing a 45-day extension. So we're going to be right back in this place in November. And, I think that our main priority has to be the American people and what's going to keep our governance in a cohesive and strong place. But unless Kevin McCarthy asks for a vote, again, I don't think we give something away for free.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard your fellow squad member, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, say Democrats should only support McCarthy in exchange for a 50-50 power sharing agreement.
Well, I mean, I think when it comes to power sharing, we will discuss that as a caucus and what we would finally accept or not. But again, it comes at a price. You don't just vote for a Republican speaker for nothing. That's not what we're elected here to do. We're elected here to make sure that we raise the minimum wage to a living wage, to make sure that we cap the prices of prescription drugs, and to make sure that we work for working class Americans.
What's your take on what just happened, on the threat of a government shutdown and just the whole experience?
Well, I think the Republican Party right now is completely out of step with the American people. And what we saw today and what we saw this week leading up to this final hour, compromise, not even a compromise, but really capitulation by the Republican Party, we saw them go through every single possible iteration of cutting benefits. They tried to cut across the board 30% of the budgets of critical agencies like the Social Security Administration. They voted, some of the most moderate members, quote unquote, moderate members of the Republican Party, casted votes for things like 80% cuts under the Department of Education to low-income schools. This is not a moderate party, period. There are not moderates in the Republican Party. There are just different degrees of fealty to Donald Trump. But it starts with a lot of fealty, and then it goes to extreme fealty. And so we saw them go through every single iteration, walk through into every single wall, kind of run around the House like a Roomba, and until they found a door that House Democrats opened, they finally realized that we should not shut down the government in order to deny trans service members the ability to get health care, in order to deny female service members the ability to get an abortion. And, they filed an extension for 45 days until we're back in here.
So let me just ask you about the larger issue. I'm not going to disagree with your description of them walking into walls, but the issue of federal spending, because just as a factual matter, the U.S. government spends more money than we take in. Now, whether you think we should cut spending or whether you think we should take in more through higher taxes, the books are not balanced, right? And the national debt is $33 trillion. Matt Gaetz said that. That was correct. The U.S. spent $475 billion last year just on interest payments on the debt, $475 billion. That's more money than went to food stamps. That is obviously money that could be better spent than on interest payments. It's more money than went to food stamps and temporary assistance for needy families and federal disability benefits and the earned income tax credit and the children's health insurance program combined, all of that combined. So it's a colossal waste of money, and it would be better if we got our fiscal house in order. Don't you agree with that? And isn't there a progressive case to be made about trying to balance the budget?
Absolutely. And I vociferously disagree with any assertion that progressivism is somehow incompatible with fiscal responsibility. Progressivism believes in making investments that actually have returns. It means investing in education so that people are actually able to participate in an economy that will pay higher wages, which also in turn yields to higher revenues. It also means taxing the rich. We have billionaires out here that are also in turn lobbying in order to increase the amount of income inequality in this country. And when you have the degree of people who are not paying taxes and in the excess of wealth that we're seeing, of course we're going to end up in a place of deficit and debt. Additionally, when you see what Republicans did earlier this year by taking and playing games with our national debt ceiling and debt limit, you're also playing games with the credit rating of the United States of America, which could also yield much different terms in terms of repayment, interest, et cetera, increasing the layouts and payments that you just described.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because I don't hear Democrats or progressives talk about the need to reduce the deficit, reduce the debt as often as a voter, as an independent voter, as much as I would like.
And it's an interesting point, and I think that we can draw those dots for sure. But really, when we talk about taxing the rich, we're talking about getting our house in order and our fiscal and our financial house in order as well. Because there's a lot of people out there who are not paying the bill, and instead of paying that bill, what they're doing is that they're taking folks like Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas on private jets in order to help facilitate additional rulings that only aggregate to their wealth. So we absolutely have an oligarchy problem in this country, and that's where you're really going to find the line item to balance the books so that kids can go to school and so that we can make sure that we make progress on things like guaranteed health care in the United States of America.
There was an interesting moment over the weekend when your New York colleague, Congressman Jamal Bowman, and he's under investigation for this now after Capitol Police say he pulled a fire alarm in one of the House office buildings. Democrats were trying to delay a final vote on the bill. There he is pulling the fire alarm. He says it was an accident. He thought pulling the alarm would open a door based on the fact that the doors to his right there were locked, and there was a sign that he said I think someone said it was confusing. I'll be honest, it doesn't really make sense to me, his explanation. Have you talked to him? What's going on there?
I mean, listen, I think if you actually do see some of the...
Hello, xin chào tất cả anh em. Sau đây tôi sẽ giới thiệu cho anh em một cách và hướng dẫn cho anh em một cách để nuôi và chăm một chú gà chọi được khỏe và sung căng nhất có thể. Và sau đây là cách hướng dẫn của tôi và anh em cùng tôi chiêm ngưỡng chú gà của tôi nhé. Và đây là mặt mũi, mỏ. Cái này người ta gọi là, tôi gọi là tía mật, chân trắng. Thường thường người ta kỵ gà bạch đầu trí, nhưng mà tôi thì chả kỵ cái móng nào, đá hay là được. Ở đây nó sẽ nhốt em nó vào bu. Và muốn chiến binh của mình khỏe mạnh nhất có thể là không thể nào thiếu phần thức ăn được. Thức ăn là một phần rất quan trọng. Sau đây tôi sẽ cho anh em hướng dẫn anh em cách để cho gà ăn không bị nấm họng hoặc là tiêu hóa. Đây. Thành phần chính là thóc. Thóc thì mùa đông chúng ta có thể ngâm qua đêm được. Mùa hè thì có thể chúng ta vo sạch ngâm 3 đến 50 phút thì có thể đổ ra phơi khô ráo nước và có thể ăn được. Đây. Đó, giờ cho vào nước này. Quay nước. Đãi sạch hết chấu đi. Đãi sạch hết chấu đi. Đấy. Vo sạch như thế, làm sạch như gạo mình ăn luôn. Đấy, đổ nước đi. Vo tầm 2 đến 3 lần. Thường thường như tôi nhà cho các chiến binh ăn xong là vo thì có thể vo được. Mình cứ căn bữa, mình vo từ sáng và mình cứ thoát sạch như này. Đấy, làm từ sáng xong là 30-40 phút sau. Thường thường là sẽ là sáng sớm, nhưng mà đây hôm nay tôi sáng tôi cho ăn hết rồi. Đây là tôi phải vo thêm và đợi một tí nữa thì là cho ăn. Làm như nào cứ mình cứ cho ăn mình làm một lần cho ăn 2 bữa, sáng tối, xong đêm hôm sau hoặc là sáng sớm hôm sau mình dậy mình lại làm như thế. Đấy, cho nó sạch hết chấu đi rồi. Ngâm như này 3 đến 50 phút. Đấy, ngâm như này 3 đến 50 phút. Nước trong như này ngâm đây 3 đến 50 phút là có thể đổ ra phơi khô cho gà ăn được. Muốn con gà của mình mà sung khăng đỏ khỏe thì không thể thiếu được một lọ mồi cóc như này. Đấy, đây là mồi cóc tôi đặt của anh Trương Lê. Đây, có mỗi ngày thường bây giờ mùa nóng tôi cứ cho ăn mồi này thì ngày nào mình phải cho ăn. Đấy, mồi này ngày nào mình cho ăn. Nhưng con này thèm mồi, nó nhìn thấy mồi là nó rình ra để nó mổ luôn. Đấy, nó cứ tìm được ra để nó mổ. Đấy, mồi cho ăn ngày ăn 2-3 viên được, mỗi ngày ăn 2-3 viên. Sáng mình cho ăn thóc xong thì tầm độ 9-10 giờ mình cho ăn mồi kèm theo rau giá cà chua để con gà nó được bổ sung. Ăn mồi này thì có khả năng nó sẽ rất nóng thì mình cho ăn thêm rau giá cà chua để cho nó hãm cái nóng ấy nó lại. Ăn mồi này thì gà cực kỳ sung căng đỏ khỏe, với cả nhanh vào cốt con gà. Đấy. Nhiều anh em nuôi gà những con gà tơ như này là đã lôi đi cứ thế thử túi bụi rồi, là không cho nó khô khén lông lá là để nó thử sớm là con gà nó sẽ hỏng cốt sớm. Về sau là xương cốt nó bị như kiểu người anh thế, đấm nhiều vào một chỗ là nó đau. Thì đây như con gà thì đánh nhiều vào là sẽ sau là nó sẽ giảm độ tải đi và lông lá nó sẽ bị hỏng. Trong khi đến lúc mà mình vần 2 trận rồi, bọn cùng tuổi của mình nó mới vần ấy, thì lông lá chúng nó đẹp, chúng nó nhìn thấy mình thì bụi mù lên là chúng nó sẽ bảo mình là gà già. Thế không nên. Đây như tôi thường tôi nuôi gà là 11 tháng, 11 đến 12 tháng thì tôi bắt đầu tôi mới cho mở mỏ. Tầm đây lông lá các thứ là vào cốt hết rồi thì nói chung là tầm đấy nó chỉ có ăn với nó nuôi lực của nó thôi, không phải nuôi lông với cả không phải nở xương nở cốt nữa. Vần tầm đấy thì nó sẽ ra đòn ra lối hơn, và con gà mình chăm hàng ngày thì nó cũng sẽ khỏe hơn. Đấy. Con gà tơ theo anh em thì cách chăm như thế là đã đủ chưa? Nếu mà thiếu thốn cái gì hoặc là cần suy nghĩ kinh nghiệm gì thì anh em có thể chia sẻ vào đây. Tôi có thể tôi học theo anh em, tại vì tôi cũng mới chơi gà, nhưng mà gọi là nuôi về đam mê. Đấy, anh em là có kinh nghiệm và dày dặn hơn thì có thể chia sẻ vào đây để tôi học hỏi. Tất cả anh em, vừa rồi đấy là tôi gọi là giới thiệu một phần là về chú gà tơ của tôi, với cả giới thiệu về lọ mồi cóc tôi đang dùng cho chú gà tơ của tôi ăn, và cách thức cho ăn thóc hoặc là làm thóc sạch như vừa rồi. Rất cảm ơn anh em đã tìm và xem video của tôi. Hẹn anh em vào video sau, khi nào vần em này hoặc là tôi sẽ nuôi, tôi sẽ quay cho anh em xem hàng ngày em nó sẽ tiến bộ như thế nào. Chào anh em.